I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me, and when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. On this channel, we post writing tips, unboxings, book hauls, book reviews, and the occasional vlog. And today we are reviewing Dune by Frank Herbert. Dune has been all over the place recently with the new release of the Dune film part 1. I have seen that. I am going to do a how does the film compare to the book review, but before we do that review, we need to review the actual book. Before we get into reviewing this book, if you like what you see, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. And if you want to see more from this channel, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell down below to be alerted as soon as I upload a new video. As always with my book reviews, we will do spoiler-free first, followed by a spoiler alert for when I might go into a bit more detail on why some spoilers might crop up. But before we get into that, let me read you guys the blurb. The spice melange is the rarest and most valuable element in the universe. It does everything from increasing a person's lifespan to making interstellar travel possible. And it can only be found on a single planet, the inhospitable desert world Arrakis. Whoever controls Arrakis controls the spice, and whoever controls the spice controls the universe. When the Emperor transfers stewardship of Arrakis from the noble House Harkonnen to House Atreides, the Harkonnens fight back, murdering Duke Leto Atreides. Lady Jessica, Jude Leto's concubine, flees into the desert with their young son Paul, where they are rescued by a band of Fremen, the native people of Arrakis. The Fremen control Arrakis' second great resource, the monstrous worms that burrow beneath the burning desert sands. In order to raise an army to avenge his father and retake Arrakis from the Harkonnens, Paul must earn the trust of the Fremen and lead a tiny army against the innumerable forces aligned against them. His journey will change everything. At the top of this book, it does say, before The Matrix, before Star Wars, before Ender's Game and Neuromancer, there was Dune, the greatest science fiction novel ever written. So Frank Herbert wrote Dune in the 1960s, and you can tell some of the parts of this book are dated. But in terms of the science fiction, I, as you can see behind me, mainly read fantasy, but I have been trying to read science fiction forever and just struggled to find a good one. I really like character-driven books as well as a good world. Now, what I find a lot with science fiction is there is a really interesting world and really interesting technology, but the characters and the general plot are normally lacking. Frank Herbert is possibly the first science fiction novel that I have read where the book is very much character driven and has a very interesting and complex plot, as well as a really well thought out and rounded world. The technology in Dune, the general description of the planet itself are amazing and all round ticks a lot of boxes. On the first page of Dune, I want to read to you guys the litany against fear. Now, the litany against fear is something very important to Paul and his mother Jessica throughout the book. It is something that they will recite when they're trying not to feel scared and to clear their minds. They can concentrate on survival. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me, and when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. I need that quote in my life, on my wall, staring at me at all times. It's just an amazing confidence builder and another way to deal with anxiety and other things like that. Frank Herbert had made like a quote to help you with anxiety before, I guess, anxiety was really well known about. The overall storyline is just one of betrayal, of backstories, of plots leading into plots and overlapping each other. Every character has a goal, which is one of the things Jane Austen is known for, especially in Pride and Prejudice, and why that book stands the passing of time is because every single character has a goal, which means every character is interesting, and that is something that Frank Herbert, in my opinion, has also managed. Because every character has a goal, this book is not going to go out of fashion. It's always going to be readable, no matter how much the writing style and general societal things change. There is so much good about this book, but there are a few things that do stand out as a little frustrating. One, stiff dialogue. I didn't mind the dialogue too much because Paul and Jessica and a lot of the other characters are supposed to be from higher up families, they're royalty. They're used to basically being surrounded by backstabbing, traitorous people. And if you grow up being surrounded by backstabbers with the threat of betrayal, with the threat of assassination, you're gonna be a bit stiff and think about every word that you say. So I don't necessarily mind it too much, but I know it is something that a lot of people don't like when they read this book. Two, it suffers from the common problem of all science fiction across the board, and definitely books written in the 60s. I personally would say it has sexist problems. It is not as sexist as most books written in the 60s. In terms of that, it's not sexist at all. It's great. The women have clothes, they have something to do in the plot. They fight until they have babies, which is a bit weird. They are powerful people in their own rights. However, they are still greatly outnumbered by the men in this book. They also, as I briefly said, kind of apparently lose the ability to fight after they have children. They apparently just become weak. I'll talk about that more in the spoiler section because I don't want to mention any names or anything like that because it would give away some of the plot. The Bene Gesserit are a really powerful group of women in this. They are sort of all-powerful, all-knowing women who are in control of the genealogy of the royal families. They breed certain genes together to create a certain type of human. They can control people using the voice. It is where they take in all of a person and pitch their voice in a way that that person cannot go against their command. If they say drop it, you drop it, without even knowing you have or why you've done it. This makes them very powerful and very feared, and the Bene Gesserit are in the imperial family's control as well. They are beside the emperor and they give advice and things like that. Now also generally portioned off to every royal family. So every royal family has a Bene Gesserit who is their concubine or becomes their wife. It is a thing in this story where Leto does not marry Jessica, and throughout he says he wishes he had, but he doesn't, because by not being married he has a political standpoint, because at any point he could get married to, say, the emperor's daughters, because the emperor only has a lot of daughters. So it is a political move, but not necessarily one that he wants to do, because he does love Jessica. Some of the Bene Gesserit do make the royals marry them because they can using the voice, which is why if you are in a room with Bene Gesserit, you need to close your ears and gag them, because if they can speak and you can hear, then you are in trouble. So there are powerful women and they do remain clothed. However, especially when they get into the Fremen and just generally the main characters who are female, I don't understand how they seem to just forget to fight. They're fighters and then they're not fighters. An example of one of the bits that I find sexist that I don't like is on page 23. At the start of each kind of chapter, there is a segment from Princess Irulan's book, which is a book of history about the Atreides and about what happens on Arrakis. Sometimes they are interesting, sometimes I don't really know why they're there. I personally don't think they're needed. I think things make sense without them because a lot of the characters tell you everything anyway. But the one on page 23, thus spoke Saint Elia of the Knife. The Reverend Mother must combine the seductive wiles of a courtesan with the untouchable majesty of a virgin goddess. Holding these attributes in tension so long as the powers of her youth endure. For when youth and beauty have gone, she will find that the place between, once occupied by tension, has become a wellspring of cunning and resourcefulness. Just typically, even Bene Gesserit, who can control things with their voice, who can see inside your deepest thoughts, apparently have to rely upon their seductive wiles and the untouchable majesty of virginity. I know it says one's beauty and all that is gone, is left with cunning and resourcefulness because they're exceptionally smart women and they are very cunning, resourceful and smart and all of that. But why, whilst they are young, do they have to use their looks? Really? Again, this is written in the 60s by a male author. I mean, it's not equal now. It was even worse then. So I get it. And he's nowhere near as bad. As I said, I mean, the women are clothed. I mean, if you look at Star Wars, the one woman has to get naked and it's not that sexist, and he is giving women power, but in a world where those women also fight and yet all the fighters are men, could have done better. But it's in the 1960s, I'll forgive it. It wasn't a thing back then, just so you're aware. It's in there a bit. In the opening of Dune, there's a bit of world building / character introduction, which is sort of tiresome to read. Paul has 3 teachers: Duncan Idaho, Gurney Halleck, and Howard the Mentat. The way that Frank Herbert introduces them all is basically one at a time. This is your dad, this is your mom, sword lesson, this is the Mentat telling you off for having your back to a door, and dip. So it introduces them all one at a time. It starts a bit slow. When I first started reading it, I struggled because it was just sort of meh. But I did get addicted to this book. So I'm not saying the plot is bad, because the plot is fantastic. The world building is amazing. It is a really good read, but you do have to get past the introductions. As the plot goes on, there's an assassination attempt and the prophecy begins. When Paul arrives on Arrakis, there is a prophecy, which I'm not going to go into too much detail because, again, I don't want to give spoilers, but there is a prophecy that the Bene Gesserit have put in place on that planet ready for Jessica and Paul's arrival. It's something they did generations ago. It's something the Bene Gesserit do. They leave holes on planets in preparation for Bene Gesserit to need them and for it to be laid out ready for them to use the path. So you have this mundane plot line in a way of the Atreides family living on Canadan, a planet full of water and beauty and doing well, and they are ordered by the Emperor to move to Arrakis, a desert, desolate planet with no water, and it's just so hard to survive there. And the whole first part is Atreides are here, introduction to all the teachers, bit of telling about the Emperor and how everything works, and then, we move planet, and then it's moving into a new house. Even things like discussing where the painting is going to go. So that is, quite a mundane family life plot. And yet at the same time, you have Leto's plot of trying to get the spice production back up and running on Arrakis because he has to hit that quota. They have to earn the money. You have Paul, who's just found out some very interesting things from the Bene Gesserit and dealing with that. You have Jessica, who has her own Bene Gesserit kind of aim, which is also going with her motherly instincts as well. You also have the Harkonnens, betrayals and plot going on. You have the Emperor's ideas and plots going on, and all of them are interlacing and fighting against and with each other. Underneath this mundane idea, which is quite dull, it feels, is this really interesting twist and turn, and as you get into the book, these become more vivid, and it's very good. What will be very interesting is when we go into the film of Dune, is where are they gonna stop part 1? Because in the book 1 ends here, page 215. So you can see what I mean by the mundane plot. All of this is before Paul enters the desert. There's a lot of world building and information in that section. Now, it will be interesting to see where the film stops, because if it stops here, stuff has happened, but is that enough for a film? Okay guys, I'm gonna do spoiler alert here. If you haven't read the book, go to this time here if you just want to see my overall view and marks out of 10 for it. If you do want to listen to more detail, if you've already read it, or if you don't mind spoilers, then stay tuned. I will repeat spoiler alert. So to this point, there's been the assassination attempt on Paul, there's been the Harkonnen attack on Arrakis, Jessica and Paul have been left in the desert, everyone is separated, some of them are dead, some aren't, and they're in a tent trying not to cry because it's a waste of water. On page 235, when Idaho Duncan finds Paul and Jessica in the desert, I just want to say how cute these quotes are and just the conversation between him and Paul. "May I take your pack, sire?" Idaho asked. "It's not heavy, Duncan," Paul said. "You have no body shield," Idaho said. "Do you wish mine?" He glanced at the distant cliff. "Not likely there'll be any more Lasgun activity about. Keep your shield, Duncan. Your right arm is shield enough for me." Jessica saw the way the praise took effect, how Idaho moved closer to Paul, and she thought, "Such a sure hand my son has with his people." Just how cute is Idaho? It's just that sentence shows how much Idaho loves Paul and how much he is willing to protect them. So this part happens when Idaho finds Jessica and Paul in the desert. They're all outcasts. They will be killed by the Harkonnens if they are found, but they found each other. On page 266, I thought I'd found something to foreshadow something possibly happening. Sadly, it didn't, but I'm just going to share it with you because it would be kind of interesting if it did. If only we had suspensors, Jessica thought. It'd be such a simple matter to jump down there, but perhaps suspensors are another thing to avoid in the desert. Maybe they attract the worms the way a shield does. The Harkonnen Baron has suspenders to keep his weight up because he's too fat to move by himself. So if he stepped foot on the desert, would he just get eaten by a worm? Worms are basically what they say on the tin. They're giant worms that eat anything that moves in the desert. So when you're in the desert, you must move in irregular patterns because if they hear regular footfall, that doesn't sound like sand and they will therefore eat it. On page 318, there is another quote which upset me in terms of sexism. Again, I will repeat, it's written in the 1960s. It is a science fiction, which in my opinion means they can do anything they want. They don't need to have gender norms. They literally can do whatever they want. And yet, still, they like to keep the gender's social barriers in place. This is another one of the quotes from Princess Irulan's book. My father, the Padisai Emperor, was 72, yet looked no more than 35. The year he encompassed the death of Duke Leto and gave Arrakis back to the Harkonnens. He seldom appeared in public wearing other than a Sardaukar uniform and a Berserk's black helmet with the Imperial Lion in gold upon its crest. The uniform was an open reminder of where his power lay. He was not always that blatant, though. When he wanted, he could radiate charm and sincerity, but I often wonder in these later days if anything about him was as it seemed. I think now he was a man fighting constantly to escape the bars of an invisible cage. You must remember that he was an emperor, father head of a dynasty that reached back into the dimmest history. We denied him a legal son. Was this not the most terrible defeat a ruler ever suffered? My mother obeyed her sister superiors where the Lady Jessica disobeyed. Which of them was the stronger? History already has answered. A few things this makes reference to. The Sardaukar are the Emperor's personal army. It is from a prison planet where they send prisoners, and basically you only survive there if you become a Sardaukar who's an elite fighter. They are insane at fighting, which is one of the reasons the Great Houses fear the Emperor, because he has these Sardaukar at his disposal. The bit that upsets me is still in the science fiction world where Herbert could do anything he wants to do. Still, a daughter cannot rule. Still, a son is more important than a daughter, even though she is the Emperor's daughter. And again, the whole thing of the Bene Gesserit, so Princess Irulan's mother is a Bene Gesserit like Jessica. Jessica disobeyed and gave a son because apparently they can control the gender of the baby born, whereas Irulan's mother didn't. She obeyed the Bene Gesserit and only gave a daughter. It helps the story because obviously one of the reasons the Emperor fears the Atreides is because they have a son, whereas he only has his daughters. But you can see why this bothers me. Yeah, it's 1960s. I know this was still a thing. I know sons were still more important than daughters. But being a woman reading a science fiction book and just hearing that when you've heard it your whole life of how less important you are than a son, it kind of hurts. On page 386, at this point in the book, Paul and Jessica are with the Fremen. Paul has killed one of the Fremen warriors. He has then ended up with the guy's wife, which is another thing that kind of frustrated me of when she came up to him and went, okay, well, should I be a wife or a servant? Because again, women have no power. Great. But at this point, Jessica might gain power. They know she knows things and she's going to take the test. It is a test where you drink poison. It's how you become a reverend mother. If she can turn the poison into a neutral liquid so it will not kill you within her body, then she is a reverend mother. If she fails in this, then she will die. The interesting part in this is she is pregnant. You're not meant to do this whilst pregnant, because what happens is when you become a reverend mother, you get all of the past memories and information from the past reverend mothers, which if you have a baby, it can kill them. That's what she's risking. In Dune, it doesn't kill her daughter. It makes a seriously badass child who I adore, but it could have killed her. But in any case, She changes the water. She's now Reverend Mother. The Fremen then basically have a massive orgy after drinking this liquid that she has turned from a poison to a kind of hallucinogenic kind of drug. But at this point, on page 386, Paul has killed a man. He has sort of started to fancy Chani, who's a Fremen lady who is amazingly cool and a fighter. He has become the Duke Atreides, yet he still asks his mother, is this all right for me to drink? I love how this is a reminder that Paul is still young. He still needs his mother's help and protection, and this kind of just reminds you of that fact. We then get into book 3. So we are now this far through the book. A lot happens in book 2. There is a lot of Paul walking around a desert with Jessica, but it is very interesting, and all of the plots and betrayals are becoming far more vivid, and you know a lot of what's going on now. You can see the different character arcs happening, everything is in play, everything is dangerous, and the Fremen are involved, and I adore the Fremen because they are just so funny. They are very blunt, to the point. Water is the be-all and end-all. Water is the most important substance on this planet because there is none of it. So when Paul sheds a tear after he's killed a man, that is a sign of great respect. Paul doesn't know it when he does it. He's crying because he's just killed someone and he's upset by this. Jessica has also just told him off because when he kills a man, everyone else is like, oh, well done, well done. And she wants to make sure he knows that taking a life should not be done lightly and that it is not a good thing. So she reprimands him. So obviously he is upset. But the Fremen take his tear as giving water to the dead, as being very respectful. You love that person so much that you are willing to lose some of your water, basically your life force, for that person. So the Fremen are just very, very interesting. Paul has now got with Chani, who is a Fremen woman, during the big orgy of the hallucinogenic. They get together and they become partners. What I love about Chani and Paul is that A, they respect each other, but B, Paul now is a target. He's become kind of known. People want to know where they stand with him. So he gets requests to fight a lot. Now, Chani fights them first, which Paul doesn't like, but she's like, well, if they can't defeat me, they can't come to you. And I find that so impressive because not only then does Paul not need to use his energy to fight, but she is stronger than all those blokes who want to fight Paul because none of them get to him. It's amazing, which is what makes page 453 frustrating, because when the Fremen capture some Sarduka, which obviously Paul and Jessica are like, holy shit, you have Sarduka, because the Fremen are stronger than the Sarduka, they can fight them. Stilgar spirits Chani away from the fight. I'm sorry, but this Fremen woman has fought so many Fremen men and won to stop them getting to Paul, and yet during a fight she's spirited away from the fight. It goes into what I was saying at the beginning. This is why I didn't go into detail then, because obviously that is a bit of a plot giveaway. But why is it that Chani is such a powerful woman, and yet as soon as she's with a man, she's no longer allowed to be powerful? It frustrates me, I'm sorry, it just does. This comes back to annoy me again later on, when during the big fight at the end, which is really refreshing because unlike most books where the fight scene is huge, this book is all about the world, all about the character arcs, the betrayals, the plot thickening, and the fight at the end is actually a minute part of this story. It's barely any pages, but during that fight, Paul's son is killed. Now, there are a few things that frustrate me with this. One, the son is hidden in the set with Chani and Paul's servant woman and his sister. Now, Chani, the sister, all fine, but his son is killed. How does the Harkonnen army get past Chani and that for them to be alive, for them to get to his son? A lady cannot fight once she has a man, but a newborn baby, just throw it at the enemy so it can die because it's got a penis. I don't quite understand how the son was killed. The other bit that's a bit weird is when Chani and Paul finally meet each other after the battle, and Chani is obviously upset their son has died. Paul's basically like, we can't replace them, but don't worry, there'll be more. Welcome back. If you did skip from the spoilers, we're not doing spoilers now, so this is some more of my overall review of Dune. One of the good things that Frank Herbert does is pretty much all of his characters are grey. No one is purely good and no one is purely evil. I mean, you could argue that Harkonnen Baron is a bit of a dickwad, but Paul ain't nice either. Jessica ain't that nice of a mum to put her son through the Bene Gesserit training. So none of the characters are actually genuinely nice. You don't like all of them, but you do grow an attachment and don't want them to fail, which is a really interesting way to write. And during the 60s, where, you know, it was still really common to write completely good and completely bad characters, it's interesting that Frank Herbert wrote grey characters. Overall, I would definitely recommend reading Dune. Yes, it is written in the 1960s, so there are various different problems and it's a bit harder to read than a modern written book. But I got entirely sucked into the story. I didn't struggle to read it. It was very interesting. The world building is fantastic, characterization and their arcs is beautiful, and the plot is really complex and interesting. The fight scenes are way shorter than any other book you will have read in fantasy and sci-fi as far as I can gather, which is just a refreshing way to do your plot. I've kind of had to give it 2 marks. Like, I'm kind of a cop-out, aren't I? I do this on quite a few of my book reviews, I'm sorry. But for the time it was written in the 1960s, this book is a 10 out of 10. It's far better than other science fictions written in that time, in my personal opinion. If you compared it to modern books, it would possibly go down to a 7 or 8 out of 10, simply because I cannot just let it off with the women of the book becoming pathetic when they get a man, or the fact that women are still subservient and things like that. You know, it's science fiction. It can be anything you want. Why does the sexism still have to be there? But definitely read it. I loved reading it. When I finished it, I did want to straight away read the next book. I stopped myself. I read a different one first, but you know, I did want to continue the story, so if it made me want to continue, then I have to recommend it for you guys to read. And thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you liked that review. Next week, I will do the review of how does the film compare to the book. If you're watching this after that is released, a link is above me now if you want to see how this compares to the new film that has just come out. The link is also below if you want to watch that. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to see as soon as I upload, click that little bell down below. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or Tumblr. I post general bookish pictures, as well as my writing tips and unboxings on there. And thanks for watching, guys. Bye!